Diablo 4 has been out for exactly 1 year now, and what a long, strange road it's been. Let's talk about it. Last year, on June 6th, Diablo 4 officially went live, and it was an absolute financial success. Arguably, Diablo 4 may have been the most hyped PC title since it was announced back in 2019. Players were able to jump in and experience a beautiful, gothic, and gruesome world. Gameplay felt smooth and impactful. The graphics and environmental details were par none in the ARPG genre, let alone the beautiful cinematics, cutscenes, and voice acting. The pacing of the campaign, pivotal story moments, critics absolutely loved it, and players, for the most part, loved this part of the game as well. However, it wasn't until players completed the campaign where some cracks started to form. So was this really the golden nugget we were waiting for? Or did it just seem like it was gold on the outside with nothing of value underneath? As players like myself experienced the endgame, we saw that there was in fact not much of it. The only two activities available at the time were Helltides and Nightmare Dungeons. Both of those had very low monster density and weren't that effective for the amount of experience you needed to level at that time. So players came up with their own endgame in farming the most densely packed dungeons available at that time, Champion's Demise and Ruins of Eridu. But with Blizzard having a vision for their endgame be centered around Nightmare Dungeons, they quickly nerfed those options, and frankly, even players inhaling the largest amounts of copium stepped away from the game and were nervously awaiting Season 1 to turn things around. But unfortunately, that was not the case. A month after release, mid-July of last year, Blizzard released a patch 1.1 right before the season, which proceeded to nerf absolutely every class in the game. And unfortunately, with this negative sentiment is how a large number of players approached Season 1. With that negative lens, we were all, as a player base, able to pick up all the creaks, wrinkles, and pimples that the game had to offer. And speaking of offering, Season 1 didn't really have that much to do. We didn't have the campaign. There wasn't much going on in the overworld besides repeating the same Legion events and world bosses again and again. There was no real flow to follow before you were level 50 besides just doing random strongholds, dungeons, and events in the open world, which were really not that interesting. Beyond this, some fundamental mechanics at the time were just simply broken. Moving around on your horse was painful as it is. It sometimes decides to walk, get stuck, and worst of all, get blocked by mobs. Who didn't forget those skeleton barriers? We also had no way to organize the stash, and with the inclusion of additional seasonal items like these malignant hearts, we were just starving for more and more space. Oh, did I mention there wasn't a search either? Itemization was quite painful as well. We had no way to target farm uniques, which were very essential to our builds. And that being said, the uniques that were available at the time just weren't all that interesting. They didn't change skills in any meaningful way. And the Malignant Hearts all played a much more passive role in player power than any sort of impactful interaction. At this point, what little hope that players had that Blizzard was turning it around and redeeming itself after the Diablo Immortal debacle quickly vanished. Season 2, which came out in October of last year, was the Season of Blood, where we were able to receive vampiric powers and a lot of new activities to do inside the game. The new blood rituals, or blood tides, as players call them, were overworld events that were always up except for a 5-minute interval, where players can run around, complete Bloodtide specific whispers, build threat to fight very powerful Bloodseeker enemies, and then even summon an event boss that just piled on the loot. This was a glimpse of light that we began to see for Diablo 4's future. Beyond the event and the more interactive vampiric power system, many updates came through in the core game. First off, the horse mechanic was finally fixed. It wasn't perfect, but you weren't going to be blocked by monsters anymore. The mounts were much faster, and the mount abilities felt much more impactful. Inventory management also saw a lot of quality of life changes as well. Gems became crafting materials. And speaking of crafting materials, when you progress to World Tier 3 or World Tier 4, any item quality that was below that tier's threshold for World Tier 3 Sacred and World Tier 4 Ancestral, they were instantly salvaged and those materials rewarded to you. Also, being able to name, categorize, and search through your stash made keeping track of all your different aspects more meaningful. Target farming unique became available by giving us players a boss ladder to strive through in the mid-game and early endgame. So now, those uniques that were key to some build that we were working for are no longer completely luck-based. Season 2 allowed the player base to become cautiously optimistic about the future of Diablo 4. Unfortunately, this would take another hit when Season 3, the Season of the Construct, came out this past winter to mixed reviews. To be fair, Season 2 did so much for the game, not only with its seasonal content, but the core features like the boss ladder, the inventory system adjustments, the horse fixing. Oh, and by the way, I almost forgot to mention the 40% increased experience, as well as the streamlining of nightmare dungeons to make them more engaging and have additional density, were all in Season 2. Season 3, unfortunately, all it had was that new mechanic, which was not as well received as a Season of Blood. This caused a lot of outcry with the player base, as the seasonal mechanic, vaults, didn't feel rewarding and players didn't like the idea of just standing around trying to avoid traps. Thankfully, with some modifications to the difficulty and less punishment regarding receiving rewards at the end of a vault, reception did improve a little bit, but overall, the new Seneschal pet mechanic felt very underwhelming, very passive, and the abilities were much less impactful than Season 2. With these fixes to the mechanics, with quick patches, Blizzard's development team retained some degree of player faith, but unfortunately, due to the minimal fundamental changes to the remaining core issues, these were hyper-focused on in Season 3. For example, managing aspects to overwhelm your inventory was not user-friendly, and going through loot, even with the automatic salvaging of irrelevant items, your inventory was still getting close to full after a single nightmare dungeon. Personally, I'm a slow reader, guys. I would at times spend more time going through my inventory and checking for any potential upgrades than I would running a nightmare dungeon. And you know what that caused me to do sometimes? It would cause me to just salvage my entire inventory, even if there was a potential upgrade, because I just didn't want to deal with it. I wanted to play the game. I didn't want to play an inventory management sim. So the players' eyes were set on Blizzard once more. And with the mid-season patch, they were able to deliver an endgame system called the Gauntlet, which is similar to challenge rifts from Diablo 3, which overall, it was something to do that's competitive PvE for the endgame, but it wasn't enough to really stick players and keep them pulling back in, as the game's elephants in the room, plural, were too large to ignore. Finally, that brings us to today in Season 4. Season 4 completely revitalized the itemization system to the point that the season theme itself is called Loot Reborn, completely focused on the new tempering mechanic, the new masterworking, the updated Codex of Power, where aspects automatically get stored in your codex to use and reuse as many times as you deem fit. We did get the pit endgame content, some cool uniques, an additional endgame boss in Andariel, and then uber bosses of each boss in the boss ladder to strive towards when you reach level 100. Now, is this enough? I've been playing recently, and I feel like although there were great advancements made in the past year, we're still not where Diablo needs to be. I feel like there's a certain doneness or feeling of completion attached with level 100, and I personally feel like that's due to not having enough endgame systems for character and item progression. Masterworking is great, don't get me wrong, but it is a rework of the original upgrade system. Tempering is new, but that's available very early on. It's not available once you hit 100. I would like to see more character progression, more endgame, more item customization, even crafting, because right now, the crafting systems we have are item modification systems. We are not crafting items from scratch. So seeing something maybe similar to runewords or different systems we can see in competitive games like Path of Exile or Last Epoch could have a strong impact here. That being said, there are a number of additions that are coming to Diablo 4 within the next year. Check out my previous video here to go and check them out. I am curious to hear your thoughts on the past year with Diablo 4 and what you'd like to see next. Thanks for tuning in. Subscribe if you like this type of content. Until next time.